Hello, everyone. My name is Davis Shoulders, and this is the first edition of Chirpin Time with Davis Shoulders that we have ever recorded. First ever interview, first ever series. So we'll hope we'll have a lot of fun. We are a literary publicity and consulting agency called Little Birds, and that includes my co-founders Abby Freeland and Kendra Winchester. And we are so excited because our first client that we have ever um, gotten to work with is West Virginia University Press. And as a part of that, we are going to be featuring their fall 2026 catalog of an incredible lineup of authors. And the first author that we are interviewing today is Meghana Mysore of her story collection, Let All Our Ghosts Depart. So I'm so excited. I got to read this collection in depth over the past week and sort of built some nice like questions to pose your way and kind of dig into the text a little bit more. But before we get started, let's hear a bit more about you. Just tell us something about yourself.
Yeah,
For,
thank you
for
so much, Davis. This is such a awesome opportunity. I'm really excited to be in conversation with you, and thank you for your careful reading of the book. I'm Meghana. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, so Pacific Northwestern vibes are very in me, like of the trees and the mountains. And I've often been in very like natural, naturey places that I think have really inspired my writing. Moved around to a lot of places in the US. I lived in Southwest Virginia for my MFA program. I was in Connecticut and New Haven where I did my undergrad at Yale, and then have just continued to write. And I've always really been drawn to writing and stories. I started with writing poetry probably in high school, and there's still some old like poems that I wrote from high school that I published in some online magazines that I think might be findable out there. Not that one should go find them, but yeah, I think writing started really early for me, and then getting to go to writing programs and study writing. And then I've been teaching writing at various colleges, most recently at Bucknell in Pennsylvania. And I will be teaching in Central Virginia at Randolph College. And yeah, I think the different educational spaces I've been in, as well as the different cities across the country, have just really helped me to write and have been really inspiring. I've always been very drawn to just exploring what it means to be a human being. And I've been really delighted to find forms for that writing and to collect them in this book.
That's really incredible, and you can tell because these, I'll mention that all of these stories a lot of them have been published previously. You can kind of see the journey that you've gone on through writing and teaching and exploring in these topics. And so I want to start with sort of a question that's embedded in the title, Let All Our Ghosts Depart. You've got a lot of ghosts in these stories. They take different forms, and I think we all love a good ghost story. But when you say ghost story, the epitome of what that means, pervasive timber of the notion of what a ghost is. So that's the first question. As you were thinking of these stories, what does a ghost mean to you?
Yeah, I feel like that theme of the ghost or just the recurring motif kind of became apparent to me as these stories started coming together as a collection. Like I didn't quite understand that there was this sort of ghostliness or this presence running through them, but as I saw them all together on the page, it became clear that there was something like this ghost or this kind of voice that was moving through the text. And yeah, if I think about that, I think it's very connected for me to family. A lot of these stories are connected to family and like questions of lineage and ancestry and sort of where we come from, and the sorts of ideas and emotions and experiences that are passed down through like oral histories through our families, and also just kind of metaphysically in ways that we can't quite express or that might not be as tangible. And so for me, I think the ghost and as comes through, I think in a lot of these stories is something that's less tangible, but just sort of felt and passed down from one generation to the next. So like when I think about ghost, I think a lot about the presences of people who were once there and are not, and that could be in this sort of space of death, like people, ancestors who've passed on but are still kind of watching over us, or there's some way in which they're still involved in our stories. And I think it's partly cultural. I come from a background of my parents are immigrants from South India, and there's a sense of spirituality that runs through our family. And so I think just watching certain traditions like in temples and with my grandparents when I visit India, like there's a sense of this other presence, this other being, which is perhaps a spiritual force, but it's something that connects us as well. And I feel like even just walking around in my daily life, sometimes I will feel this sort of presence, which might be like the voice of an ancestor. And I often think about the women in my family line who are there and who might be speaking to me through the things that I'm going through that feel really personal. But there's always this sense of I'm part of something collective or something beyond me. And I think about that as the voice of my ancestors, in just the sense that even when people have passed on, like they're not quite gone, like there's still a sense of presence and a sense of their voice and influence, which I think you'll see in a lot of these stories. Some of the characters really hear their ancestors' voices and hear them really embodied, or hear the voices of family members who have passed on but are still kind of ever present to them. And so the ghost is there in the sense of kind of haunting, but maybe there's like a different valence to that haunting where it's not just scary, but maybe can invite us into a sort of like collectiveness.
Absolutely. That's an incredible answer, and makes sense having read the text that would, what it would be. I kind of have a follow-up to that, in that there's a moment in which the understanding someone else's shared ghost is sort of an intimacy, right? So it's not even necessarily the sort of abstracted persona that might be a ghost or an ancestor. Ghost becomes almost like a verb,
Hmm. Hmm.
to have
Yeah.
to have to have held the energy, like, oh, we've been through that experience with a ghost before. And I think about how, like, that's the best part of family, right? And lineage is to have sort of this other world connection that is sort of dropping hints here and there along your own journey in reckoning with it. So it's like, if we it's this collection almost suggests that, like, if only material reality was all we had access to, life would be boring. The characters are otherworldly at this always at the same time. Their foot is in this other. So, like, I guess I was kind of wondering, continuing on that lineage thing, like what is the walking along in this other world like for you in your own family history and ancestry? Because there's so many different permutations that could be from your personal life or not, but the notion of this massive family is incredibly present.
Yeah, I think for me, like just to, I guess like a starting with sort of a broad notion of like where I find myself in the worlds of my own writing. I feel like writing for me is a lot of trying to understand something, and it's not, I don't necessarily often feel like once I finish a story, like I have answers to questions. I often have a lot more questions, but I do feel like I like that notion of kind of walking through something, like walking through a world with my characters and trying to be present with them in that world. Yeah, I feel like in like walking through the stories of these characters, I was trying to make sense of the way that I experience life, which is in this very contemporary, technology mediated reality. And like some of the stories have technology or different forms of it, from like WhatsApp messages with these characters will often have family members in India, as I do, and talking to my grandparents and my Aji, my grandmother, on WhatsApp like every morning when it's nighttime for her there. And also just like text messages and this sort of sense of being in multiple, like we are in multiple realities, even when we're living in our daily worlds. And I think that was something that through this collection and writing it over the course of several years, like I was trying to make sense of these different spaces in my own life and how they can cohere and come together and coexist. So, for instance, like some my daily life includes like texting my grandmother on WhatsApp or WhatsApping her and maybe like conversing with someone about dating apps and about the notion of ghosting and how people ghost people, right? Which is also like an interesting word and kind of verb like related to ghosts and ghost making. And then also like the sense of sometimes when there's like a larger grief that coexists with those sort of daily experiences of like being in our modern reality, like all of these things are coming together but feel kind of disjointed. Like during that time when I'm texting a friend about someone who's ghosted them, like I'm also moving through an experience of grief. Yeah, the last couple years in my family kind of personally have involved various experiences of loss and grief. One of the things that happened like a little over 2 years ago is that a really large oak tree fell on my parents' house. I was actually like in it
Oh,
when this happened, and so
what a
in a way,
metaphor,
and
though, right?
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Still trying to find the way to write about it more directly, but yeah, that sense of destruction and just the rebuilding, and it took like 2 years for it to be rebuilt. And in that time also, my dad's mother passed away. So my Aji on that side who lived in Mysore, which is also my last name. And so there are all these kinds of connections that were happening simultaneously, and in that time, there were other sort of things like dating apps and like dating and moving. And I don't know, I think that in life, like all these experiences can feel oddly like at odds with each other and disjointed. And in my writing, I'm trying to find a space where it can all come together and we can kind of see that perhaps all of these different spheres are interrelated. Like there is something related between, for instance, like I'm thinking about one of the stories in the collection called Love Letters, where this mother is like is on this dating app for like cuddling, and she meets someone and then she ghosts him, and she's thinking about that sort of notion of ghost making, how people turn into ghosts. And she's also dealing with like some larger kind of grief and ghosts in her own life related to like her husband and related to various losses that she's still processing, and like her daughter and her relationship with her daughter. And yeah, I think a lot about that sense of like the word simultaneity and expansiveness, and how everything that we think about in life as being so apart or feeling like disconnected, like actually perhaps there are these linkages. And for me, when I'm writing, it helps me to feel more connected to, as you're kind of gesturing to like this larger family of things, these voices of my ancestors, the voices of my Ajis, of my Aji and my Tata who have passed away. Like even if, for instance, on my dad's side, I didn't feel like I got to know my dad's father that well when he passed away. And so I think that the story in the collection that deals with a granddaughter who's like going into a Denny's and seeing her grandfather, and she believes he's there, and it's kind of absurd, and he's like getting his hair done. I think it came from that place of feeling like we can still get to know people even after they're gone. Like I kind of believe in that idea that there is this sense of people's voices that are still there and like their stories, and our knowing of someone, I don't think ends like once their physical presence on the earth departs. So there is something that continues. And I was trying to tap into that thread, the thing that continues, the thing that connects us, that connects all these experiences that can feel really disparate.
Incredible. Yeah, I I have multiple now that we're in it, I just have multiple things to ask you, and we'll see how much we keep to our list of questions we thought through. But this notion of, you know, of course things are unresolved, right? Of course things are unresolved when people pass. But also just the way that you talk about walking in the world with these characters, I think. Well, what I wanted to point out is it's can be hard to describe the contemporary experience right now with digital and phones and stuff. And so I love this sort of Black Mirror coded speculative element that you've woven in. And the word that I've been using a lot is thrumming. There's a feeling of life is thrumming, and you're trying to go through the day, and like Julio Torres has this great show that like deals with that sensation of just like something is coming in and interrupting and this and that, and so you may be handling different tiers of grief at any one point in time, and and someone's intervening grief may be larger or lesser or conflicting. It's like I could handle this now, but I can't handle it with these 3 points. And so it kind of feels like there's this busyness of the mind thrumming through all of this, and that the characters, all the narrators are a little bit, they're like waylaid by it, but they're sort of responding in ease to sort of to reach across that boundary and get some answers, or be annoyed by the answers that they're receiving that they don't want to accept. And so I find that it's a very gallery driven way to write a fiction narrative, right? Is that like you're walking through an experience. And in that sense, I kind of want to come to the experiential objects. Like I really love this personification. I like there's multiple times where a ghost is represented. We have the scarves that represent ex-lovers. I'm trying to remember, I had a list going here. The woman who dreams she wants to become a balloon. I think I mentioned this to you, but Sheila Hetty's book Pure Color has this grief, very coded, grief coded, similar situation. She just imagines being a leaf. And so when that I want to knit myself into this room, I just thought that was incredible. And of course the car in Repair Shop, the Prius being the mom. Kind of like what did you use? It feels like these objects are portals, so to speak. So I'm curious about your relationship to the blurring of that line of physical objects and human spirit, and then also sort of your relationship to the material culture. There's so much knitting in it, whether Anaji's knitting something or the character's knitting something, that being passed and symbolism there. So
Yeah, yeah, that's such a good question. I love that word thrumming. I think that that's absolutely true. Like there's this sense of all these different tones and energies and feelings. And I do feel like life, like my experience of life is that it's like buzzing and thrumming, and there's the sense of the coexistence or the simultaneity of like grief and joy and absurdity and humor. And like even when I'm grieving something, like I'm in the grocery store, like in the line, and like someone does something a little peculiar, and like I notice that, and it's funny, and like I think that any emotion that I feel, even in the depths of it, like there's still other emotions contained within it. And so I definitely wanted to portray that and kind of the complexity of grief through allowing it these different like jagged edges of like absurdity and like humor as well to kind of come through. But yeah, and the kind of like knitting part of your question, I actually don't knit. I'm expecting that one day I will probably knit. And the reason I say that is because my Aji on my mom's side is like an avid knitter and like a crocheter, and she's so good, and she's made yeah, like sweaters and scarves and baskets and all these things that I've been lucky enough to get and to hold with me in the different places I've lived. And my mom is too, but it's kind of funny, like the way that my mom started knitting. I just sort of found her one morning as I was waking up and I was here at home, and just like found her on the couch knitting. And this was during the pandemic, and she hadn't been knitting. Like I'd never actually seen her knit before, but just like suddenly one
wow.
morning, I woke up and she was there knitting. And then she kind of described it like how she never actually learned how to knit. It was is one of these sort of metaphysical, like inherited things, I think, or that's how I understand it, is that like my Aji, like the sense of her knitting and like how much she knits and how much I think for my Aji, it's really been a way for her to speak through like all these experiences that sometimes she can't always articulate or like find the language for, but like experiences of grief and trauma and also joy. I think like knitting has been there as a constant in her life. And yeah, my mother just started knitting through the pandemic. I think it was like a time of a lot of grief, just personally and also globally. And it seemed really random, but as I kind of thought about it more, it really seemed like a way that she was connecting to her own mother. And she also voiced that to me that there was some way, like through this action of knitting, that she felt like she could access memories and her own mother and her own upbringing and like memories that she had from growing up in the house with her mother and father in India and ways that she felt like there were silences between her and her mother and like in some again like metaphysical or like not fully articulable or explainable way like she came to understand her mother more deeply like through this shared action. So I
Mm.
think seeing that was really inspiring, and I fully expect someday, perhaps when I'm a mother, like, to just be like sitting on the couch knitting and for that knowledge to have just been to just pass on to me wordlessly. But I think that there is a lot that we contain in objects and in like these ways of speaking that are beyond language. So I think a lot of these stories try to access that and like speak to that. Like, how are these characters speaking to each other across time and space, even when they're separated geographically, often because these characters are of the diaspora and are far from their families who are often in India, as members of my family are. In this sense of like the space and the geography and the separation and distance, but like what persists, or like how do we communicate with people who are not there either because they passed on or because they can't physically be present with us because they're in another country or they're far away. Yeah, and I think this sort of like the buzzing or the thrumming kind of nature of life, as you put it really well, like that energy comes through all of these different objects and these transformations for these characters where like you said, they transform into people transform into scarves, like ex-lovers transform into scarves. A character's mother kind of resides within her Prius, like even after she's passed on. And all of these different energies of the objects also carry, I think, with them like a certain absurdity or playfulness. And I think beyond like all of my analysis of these stories, there's also just that. There's also just the playfulness of these objects. And I think like my belief that like grief can be like there's like an energetic valence or like feeling to it, which is playful or which is there's some energy that actually points back to life. And I think I was trying to explore that in a lot of these stories. Like, what is that energy that comes back to laughter or that comes back to life and what is here right now? How can we carry the presences of those who are not there in the same way that they were, but perhaps are there, like in the car or in the scarf? And how can we kind of let go while also acknowledging that like people, I don't think that people like fully disappear. There's a sense of what they've given to us that like exists in the world or is regenerated in some way, like into the natural landscape, into the objects that we hold dear or that are close to us. And maybe that energy, though, there's also a weightedness to it, like a sadness.
Mm.
There could also be something just kind of playful and like a sense of life. I think often when these characters remember people who've passed on, like I'm thinking about Repair Shop, they my characters remember like their mothers, or often women who are close to them in like a really playful way. Like just that was really important to me for, that character to remember her mother and to again like learn about her even after she was gone, to learn that as a child her mother used to like play with her brother and throw Maggie noodles onto his head or vice versa. That there were these parts of her that were just like childlike and
Yeah, you
energetic. Yeah.
sometimes we think of ancestors just in their final form, but like getting to
Right.
see the previous stories was really like the like if you go back in time and back in time, you get the layers of the person coming moving forward and going backwards in time, which is really amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
What you do well is you present a stage of grief that isn't in its beginning phase, which there's a place for that in writing. But I think I noticed that you're talking about that we need these objects, we need these ritual, we need catharsis and sublimation,
Mhm.
through these things, and you know how do you set up contemporary characters to be experiencing that, without this setting of sort of like retreat like meditative setting, right? Like where we imagine grief occurring, and it's like, well, grief gets healed in everyday life, right? It gets healed in the activity. But one of the things is that like, you set the space that these characters are trying to achieve. Like each one, you're like, oh, there's the gap. They don't want to talk to this one person. Like, oh, like they haven't gotten over a person who's passed, or they're holding on to certain traumas. But I think that when you talk about how joyful it is, because like you could say like there's a dark tone to these stories,
Mhm.
right? There's
Yeah.
definitely like it's you're
Absolutely.
covering the bases,
Yeah.
but the way that they navigate it to it is so joyful and so humorous and so sort of bumbling, and so that the first question that ever came to my mind is the one I want to ask you, which is like, what is the color of grief? Because you've shown that it can be so vibrant, that it can be, and bringing in the South Asian diaspora ethnicity and all of that, like of course it's going to have like the color tone of you and you're relating to family and the warmth of family, but
Mhm.
even greater than that, it feels like it's a sharper electricity than I'd imagine as I meet these characters, like I see them go through this sort of like, oh, well, this, well, that, oh, well, isn't that funny? These constant pings of reminders as if the ghosts are tricking them. Like the Oh, and I had one more thought. I might sneak it in before you answer this, but I was like, maybe you need a ghost to teach you to knit. Maybe that's part of this. And so
Mhm.
what I'm, in defining the color of grief, which is the main question. How is that sort of vibrancy being led, being tricked along by the ghosts in this collection? So.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that's wonderful questions. And I think absolutely there's the sense of the knittedness and the thread that's kind of moving through here. And I think about these stories and even their sequencing, which it took a little time to arrive at the sequencing of the stories as they are now. And I think it's not a linear progression, like from like dark to light or something. Like
Oh, yeah.
there are a lot of there's like a lot of ups and downs like within the stories, and I think within their experiences of grief, and also perhaps to the colors and like the scheme, the motion of the colors in the stories. And I think there is something like that the ghost or the kind of like ancestors are guiding along for these characters is like the movement of that color. I think in a very clear way that's happening in the story Spring Fling, with like the knitting, the character who kind of like knits, she knits walls kind of around her room and like around herself, and she really feels like that's being guided by her Aji, but then her Aji like comes to visit her in this kind of surreal situation, and she doesn't think that it's her who's guiding her. I think it's something that's even beyond that. It's beyond any of these characters who are there. It's like some presence, like the ghost or something that is moving her to knit in like this way that like these stories are really centered on women, and there are other genders and characters who are in the stories too, but it was really important to me to have like women be at the center of this collection, because there was some sort of way that I felt like women in a family line were kind of speaking to characters across time and space. Some sort of knowledge, like whether it is of certain violences, like and patriarchal violences that these women have faced like across time, but that beyond the sort of pain and the weightedness of those violences, there's also a togetherness that comes and a playfulness. And I'm not going to give away the last moment of the story, Spring Fling, but hopefully it's kind of an unexpected moment and a playfulness and a joyfulness and like this sort of coexistence in this way that these women across the family line are speaking to each other and are finally kind of in the same place. I think the characters throughout this collection try really hard to like be in community to find a space of belonging. And that's often because of the spaces that they're in, and different violences and prejudices that they face in their communities, but also the sense of the specific experience of like being of the diaspora and often being like really far away from your family. And so this kind of searching is persisting for them, where they're searching for a place to land, a place to belong, a place where they can coexist with like their family and to feel at home. And I kind of think about the last moment in that story as being a moment when all these characters in a different form are like finally at home or at rest with one another. But getting back to your question, there's a sense of the colorfulness absolutely at the end of kind of that story and like all of these kind of colors coming together. And I think that that is what ends up happening with the color of grief through the collection is that rather than a transformation from one color to another, I think it's actually more like an accumulation of like all these colors and really a sense of like a rainbow-like experience of grief where there are colors contained within colors and like a sense of even within the depths of perhaps a dark blue grief and within that sea, like when these characters really plumb the depths of that, there's like something really orange and bright. The color orange also connects to my South Asian ancestry and family, where orange is just present in a lot of kind of the clothing and the culture, and like orange and red are colors that come through and in like henna and all these different shapes that yeah are just part of what I'll see like on women's hands in India and just like in my family. And so there's a sense of the brightness of that. And like orange and red are so vibrant and are so full of life. We often think about grief as holding, as sort of containing like darker colors, like being kind of dark blue or just like dark in some way. And there's certainly a lot of darkness in this collection, and there is that darkness. But as the characters wade through it, I don't think it's not necessarily the absence of that dark blue or heavy grief, but then, yeah, it also contains like sparks of orange and red, and yellow and all these other kind of sparks of colors that are playful and that point in different directions. I kind of wanted the women in these stories to also like speak to each other, like as if
Yeah.
like I kind of have this image in my mind, which, readers can experience it in whatever way they're going to experience the collection, but where I sort of felt as I had collected these stories together and finally found their sequencing, that the characters were all standing next to each other, like accumulating, and maybe there were ways that, one woman's hand, even like one of the older women, like her hand bleeds into like a younger woman's hand, and there's a sense of their stories converging, like they're absolutely points of convergence in these stories, or ways that there are commonalities and similarities between the characters and their kinds of experiences. But then there's also like a sense of accumulation, or like they're all kind of standing next to each other and like linking, holding hands. But yeah, it was really important to me to have this sense of like all their voices are in conversation, and even if like imagining the characters in my stories all coming together or hearing each other, speaking to each other, there's a way that they then become like less alone.
Yes. And and in the collection of griefs that you indicate, like you need to have a team of people who've
Yes, yeah.
responded to different things. Because if it's you could have focused on one type of grief, but you didn't rest there because that's not what life is. We have multiple types of grief interacting at any point in
Mm-hmm.
time. But the color that you're describing, it feels like it's drawing like not every story gets the full brightness exposure, like that moment at the end of the spring fling, but like each of them has a little part of the rainbow that they're drawn to,
Mm-hmm.
and I
Mm-hmm.
think I really see that clearly. And and like they don't have to be related, or the stories don't have to exist in the same time, and yet they all do. And that's kind of what I'm going to get into our final question. But I'm noticing that in this classic element of showing and not telling, you're also showing grief and not telling it necessarily. And
Yeah.
that some things don't have to be spoken directly or completed or healed for us to see, like, oh, they came out of that darker green and blue, and they've migrated towards the orange hue, right, of the lineage. But I guess what is so comforting is being able to feel everything and not feel like your only responsibility is to feel everything. You get to feel a little bit of everything and a little bit of healing in every story. And so I just applaud this vehicle of storytelling as a whole. Again, and it's many people will be seen in this that have not been seen before in these particular ways. But ultimately, what is the healing that you were going through for yourself, for your readers? What is that sort of bigger vision of? Because it's not always do we get to talk about fiction in such a way that we're talking about this like healing energy as well. It often gets relegated to sort of self-help or pretentious heights of literature that's healing. But this is truly everyday stories of expanding our sense of seeing. So yeah, what do you hope the impact of that healing is?
Yeah, totally. What a good question. But yeah, I really do hope that, in some way that like people who read this collection do feel a little bit of healing, in whatever way that is. And yeah, I hope that, through as a teacher, like I'll often talk about what I've learned from my teachers, my writing teachers, which is that through specificity, like we actually get to this feeling of relatability. And that's kind of my hope, is that like through real specific characters here and centering experiences like mine or like members of my family, centering brown women of the South Asian diaspora, and really getting into their lives and centering them in ways that, I don't think characters like these are centered enough in literature or in media. But it's speaking to them, and it's also speaking to people who may not look like me, who may be different from me, who may be a different gender than me, who may be a different race. And I do really hope that it reaches out to a lot of people. I can only write from like my own specific sort of like these stories are fiction and but they grow from within me and like what I've seen and what I've experienced and the people that I've been around. But through that kind of specificity and these specific voices and these worlds, I really hope that whoever reads these stories like feels a little less alone in existing with all of these parts of self, like whatever those parts might look like. I think there are lots of different characters in these stories who are dealing with various forms of grief and are often of differing ages, like women of all of different ages and different life experiences within these stories. And I see them as distinct characters, and also in some ways, they're kind of like different parts of myself, different parts of me, like different voices that I hold within me. It probably takes like an entire lifetime for us to first hear all of those voices within ourselves, to encounter them, to meet them, and then to accept them. And I'm not expecting that, through reading this collection, we will arrive. I don't think I've arrived, at a place of like accepting all of these parts of myself, but I do hope that readers come to encounter these different parts of themselves, like the part that is still healing, the part that is still growing, the like shadow self, the child self, all these selves that might have been suppressed and like silenced and not heard for a really long time because they're stuck in grief or they're stuck in a place while the rest of the world kind of seems to move along. And I hope that these stories help people to see those parts of themselves, the parts that they've kind of withheld or suppressed because it's hard to exist in like this society that moves on and then time moves on and it's a very kind of capitalistic motion or movement of time. But I hope that this collection allows people to slow down and to see those parts that are still growing or perhaps stuck, whatever they might be, and to like welcome them in and to not be as afraid of, yeah, these different parts.
That's a beautiful response, and that's for a beautiful collection. And I can't wait for people to dig in and pre-order this book and read it and share it. Our final question before we'll sign off here, because we are named Little Birds, and we decided we want to have a question that we ask every author that we talk to. In that vein, if your book was a bird, what kind of bird would it be?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I've been between three answers.
Okay,
You
you can give
know,
them all. There's no rules yet.
okay, so peacock, hummingbird, and blue jay. I do think blue jay probably is like the one that rises to the surface.
May I
Um,
may I say I had a guess that it might be hummingbird, and obviously
really?
by my thrumming comment, I
Yes.
didn't.
So hummingbird was like a close runner-up, I would say. And I think maybe like going along with the theme of this collection is not one thing, it's not one tone or like one form of grief. Like maybe it's all of them. Maybe they're all friends or they're like in a throuple, the like hummingbird and the peacock and the blue jay. So like really it's like the throuple of them, I think is like what I want to be the bird of this book. But yeah, hummingbird, like it has this sort of slow, constant energy that builds and that it seems quiet and like beautiful, but then there's something really fierce in a hummingbird. And as they're kind of a constant in our lives, in this energy that thrums and builds. And like the peacock, I do think there's a sense of fierceness in these women and in these characters, though it may start as kind of a quieter energy. It also builds, like there's this sense of crescendo and this up and down kind of movement of their stories and a fierceness, a sense of characters who speak their mind, who say what's on their minds, who learn how to say that and just like kind of shine like a peacock does with all these colors and this confidence and a blue jay. I do really love the color blue and I do associate grief with blue, but I think the blue jay is also like beyond what we might consider her to be, like just kind of we consider a blue jay to be blue and kind of beautiful and she is those things, but she's also, she also might turn to a different color. Like we don't know, she has so many lives. And yeah, so I guess my final answer is a throuple of the hummingbird, peacock, and blue jay.
Humming, humming peacock blue jay bird. So
Yes. Yeah.
I'm sure some we can find some artists to put them all together in a way.
Yeah.
I definitely relate to the peacock energy though, for sure. I can see the sort of tapestry of that sort of that beautiful fierceness, kind of that comes out. from these all of these mothering characters, and helping the ghost depart, you know.
Yeah.
So yes, thank you, Meghana, for doing this. We're thrilled to be, promoting and talking about your book. Again, it is called "Let All Our Ghosts Depart," series of stories coming out of West Virginia University Press this September of 2026. So we look forward to hearing so much more about this book and where it'll go. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Davis. Yeah, thank you.
Little birds, you plant the seed, we spread the word. Take the truth you speak far across the land. Little birds, if you ain't got time to chirp, take your dreams, give them wings to make them soar across the sky. Oh, little birds, oh, little birds, ba-ba-da-ba-ba, little birds, ba-ba-da-ba-ba-ba, little birds. Little birds, little birds, little birds, we spread the word.